thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Sasha Reade and I'm over here on the WOW YouTube channel doing a fun tutorial using some of their amazing products. So today we are going to create a technique called double embossing. And what we're going to do is we're going to use embossing folders as well as heat embossing, and we're going to combine the two to make a really cool technique. So today I am using embossing ink, an embossing folder, a brayer, and some embossing powder. Now if you don't have a brayer, this technique you might struggle with slightly. I'm going to share with you in a second how it looks if you don't use a brayer. And it kind of ends up a bit of a hot mess. So the brayer allows us to apply ink onto the embossing folder without putting ink where we don't want it to go. I am inking up the bumpy side of my embossing folder. So on the left is the indented side, on the right is the dented side, so the more bumpy side. And then that way when our ink goes on to the embossing folder, we are doing the raised bits only, which then end up being the indented bits on this piece of card. So I'll share with you how it will look if you do it on each side and the effects you get. So here it is, all nice and ready to go, where we can go ahead and heat set it. If you've got any bits that have got on bits of the card that you don't want it on, take a nice clean paintbrush and you can just brush those off. Now, if you don't have a brayer and you try direct to your embossing folder, you've got to be so gentle. If you just glide it along, this is the result you're going to get. So if you have not got a brayer and you want to do this technique and you want to just do direct from your ink pad to your embossing folder, be as light-handed as you possibly can. Maybe slightly dab it rather than run it, because if you drag it along that embossing folder, you end up with a lot more ink in a lot more places that you don't realize you got that ink in. So when I go ahead and add my embossing folder on, or my embossing powder, onto my embossed cardstock, you can see just how much of that embossing ink kind of grabbed everywhere else. So you can see here it's a bit of a hot mess, and that is going to be a nice messy cleanup for you if you want to use your paintbrush and try and tidy those areas up. So a brayer in this technique is quite essential. You can get them for usually quite cheap. I mean about £5 in the UK on average for just sort of a nice cheap and cheerful one. Now to clean your embossing folders, embossing ink can be very, very, very sticky. And I often find that soap and water do not get it off. I find that like stamp cleaner sometimes doesn't even get it off. But if you just take a little bit of rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol, or like a hand sanitizer, if that's all you got, that hand sanitizer carries alcohol in it, you can just quickly and easily wipe off your embossing folder within seconds, and there's no sticky residue whatsoever on there. And that's the same for your brayer. Just give your brayer a spritz with alcohol and wipe it down with a nice clean cloth. So when we're all done adding our embossing powder, we obviously need to heat set it. So we melt that embossing powder to get a beautiful glossy shine. And in some cases with the WOW embossing powders, you get this explosion of color or metallics in it, and it's quite cool. This one here that I'm using is the Plum Fizz from the Jo Frith Young Trio collection. And it's a really pretty, bit of purpley, vanilla colors to it. It's really gorgeous and it shines beautifully. So here's the other side of the embossing folder. I'm doing the reverse now so you can see what that looks like, and it's just as nice of an effect. It's really hard for me to decide which one I like more. They're both gorgeous, so I guess it depends whether you want lots of color or a little pop of color, and it depends on how intricate your embossing folder might be, as well as to how many details you want to show through with your embossing powder, or if you just want the background. Now if you want to see this technique stretched even a bit further, then do make sure to pop over to my YouTube channel, which is just under my name, Sasha Reade, and I'm going to share with you how you can triple emboss this technique. So I'm going to share with you how you can take another step up. So it will be a slightly longer video, but this first portion here will probably all be the same, so you can just skip through all this stuff that you've watched on WOW and you can head over into the end and see the extra sort of step that we can do. Now in my embossing, I ended up having a few dry areas where my ink obviously didn't hit. If you have that happen, WOW have this amazing embossing pen, and you can just color in those spots that are kind of missing and then add in your embossing powder. But how gorgeous does the gold look? The gold looks so fancy. This would be like an amazing wedding card, or like a really posh sort of like 50th birthday or an anniversary card. It is so stunning. It has such a great shine to it. So here are my 3 backgrounds I've created, and I'm sorry they're slightly off the screen just there. And we're going to turn them into cards now. With my purple one, I decided I wanted to have a slightly funkier design, something a little bit different. I was getting a bit bored of the sort of standard A6 card front. So I decided I would chop it down and create it into a more divided card. So I'm going to trim down an extra centimeter off of each side, which gives me 2 centimeters smaller. And you can see here the difference between my card base and my front top panel. And that will allow me to create a gap between my 2 chunks that I'm about to create. In order to cut this exactly in half, I just use my paper trimmer and I line up the top left corner, or you could go the other corner if you wanted, with the bottom right corner. So you want to go on a diagonal, opposite corners, and just line up those 2 corners right on the line where your blade is going to go, and then you can just run your blade along that, and that will chop it exactly in half without having to measure or think too hard about it. So now I have 2 exactly equal pieces of panel, and I can go ahead and place those onto my card. For a more dramatic effect, I decided that I wanted to raise them up off my card. You could always use double-sided tape for this, but I thought the easier way would be to take some foam, just some fun foam. So kids fun foam you can find in like any kind of craft section. Now I am cutting it to be just ever so slightly smaller than my panel, and then doing the exact same trick of cutting it straight in half using the corner to corner, and then that way when I line them up on the back of my little triangles, they're just tiny bit smaller than that, and they will hide nicely and neatly behind those top panels. I'm using this block adhesive from Craft Tellier in I was going to say UK, they're in Europe, they're in Spain. It is a really, really great strong adhesive. If you want something that's going to stick to glitter cardstock, especially that non-shed glitter, this glue will hold it. And I find this glue is fantastic for fun foam as well. It adheres quite quick. It still gives you some wiggle room, but it does adhere quite quick, and it is really strong. So it's a fantastic glue to have in your stash if you're struggling with a really strong one. It is quite stringy and goopy, so I only use it when I need a really strong adhesive, and I use my white glue for the rest of my projects. So I've got those 2 panels up, and I'm just going to have a quick measure of my central point, which ends up being about 1 inch. So I cut myself 3/4 of an inch of gold, and then I cut myself 1/8 of an inch smaller in the craft cardstock. I'm going to take my Happy and Birthday stamp sets from Trinity Stamps. They are my go-to stamps. They have Happy and Birthday in each set in many different fonts, so I absolutely love it. It's a fantastic set to have. And I'm going to stamp myself a happy birthday on that strip. Then I can go ahead and adhere that to my nice little backing piece of gold, and then I can stick that right down the center of our little panel split, I guess you could call it. So once I've got that all adhered and nice stuck down, I'm not even going to measure it or do anything like that. I'm just going to slap some glue on, stick it right in the center, and kind of wiggle it into place of where I want it to go, and then I can just flip it over and trim off the excess. That is the easiest way I find to add elements like this. You just cut the rest off when you're done, and so there's no measuring or stress involved, and then it looks really cool and custom as if it was meant to be. Now to finish it off, I'm going to add a few little flat back gems. I have these really pretty cute ones that have like a gold back to them, so they shine like a little diamond, but they are a slightly goldish copper color. So that's this card all finished and done. Now I did the same thing with the other panel, the one that I did the inverse of. I just wrapped a bit of twine around one of the panels before I glued it down, and added some flat back round gemmy bobble things, and did my diagonal on the other direction, so you can see what it looks like if you do that way. So those are my 2 cards finished in the purple design. Now we can move on to finishing off the gold card. This one I wanted to keep a bit more simple, have it a bit more traditional. So I'm going to back it with a piece of gold glitter cardstock. I felt like the gold on gold was a really nice wow shine factor. So again, because I'm gluing onto glitter cardstock, I'm going to use my super strong adhesive and stick that right down on top of the glitter card, and it holds really well. And given I already had some of this gold thread out, I thought, well, let's add some gold thread as well. And the trick to adding thread onto a card is to put a piece of double-sided sticky onto the back of your cardstock. And then that way when you're running your thread around your card, it can just stick to that adhesive on the back, and it doesn't move about and wiggle all over your card when you're doing it. It holds it beautifully in place, and then you can also tuck your little end bits nicely right onto that sticky bit behind your card. Now I'm going to use some tape adhesive to stick this down with as well, and I'm going to stick it directly onto the card front. I didn't feel like I needed too much dimension for the background, but my sentiment element that I'm going to stick on the front, I'm going to pop up with some foam tape. So I'm using these dies here, which are from Surprise Creation. They are a lovely set of sort of layering dies, and I've cut 2 of the same. Now you can do this with any die cut or hole punch shape that you have got. If you want to have a layer behind it, but you haven't got another die that is the next size up, or the next size up is too big for what you're doing, which is what I had in my case, you can go ahead and chop the second one in half and just trim down the sort of central point. If you've got any kind of bumpy points on your die cut, you can go ahead and trim them down as you cut them in half. And now I went ahead and heat embossed a sentiment on the front using some black ink and clear embossing powder. And all I have to do is take my little elements that I cut in half and trim down slightly and just pop them off the ends, and then it looks like I've got this beautiful extra die cut layering my original die cut. So a quick little cheater's method. It looks like a hot mess on the back, but no one's going to see that. You're going to cover it up. Now I can go ahead and add some foam tape on the back of it for a bit of dimension, and that finishes off this card. So I hope you enjoyed creating with me today. I will link my YouTube channel down below, as well as all the products used in this video. You can also find all the links for WOW, so their website, Instagram, I think TikTok, they're all down there. Just take a look. And don't forget to subscribe to WOW's YouTube channel and drop a comment. I will be keeping an eye on the comments. I'll try and reply to you if you've got any questions, or you just want to let me know what you thought of the video. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks' time with my next tutorial. Take care and have a fabulous week. Bye!